My name is Leila Nazari, and this is the story of how I lost everything when I chose to follow Christ in a place where his name is more of a curse than a blessing. If you've ever wondered about the real cost of faith, or if you've ever wondered how far religious persecution can go today, my testimony will show you that in some corners of the world, being a Christian can mean losing not only your freedom, but also the thing you love most, your children. I grew up on the dusty streets of Isfahan, a city where minarets tower against the Persian sky like silent guardians. My childhood was like that of any other Iranian girl. I learned to recite the Quran, to cover my head from an early age, and to dream of the day I would be a wife and mother. My world was limited, but safe, protected by the traditions of Shiite Islam and the strict rules of a society that does not tolerate deviation. Isfahan, surrounded by mountains that seem to embrace the city with ancient arms, is a valley where Persian history has endured and flourished for centuries. It was in this setting that my life unfolded, almost like a natural cycle, predictable as the seasons. My father, Ahmad Josini, was a carpet merchant in the Grand Bazaar, that labyrinth full of smells and sounds that pulses at the heart of the city. My mother, Sarah, was the ideal Iranian woman, silent in public, but strong and relentless in her role at home. From an early age, I learned that a woman's life was divided into 3 stages: obedient daughter, submissive wife, and devoted mother. My upbringing revolved around memorizing surahs from the Quran, preparing traditional dishes like korak efesinyan, and maintaining peace in the home without ever raising my voice. On Fridays, after prayers at the mosque, my mother would say to me in a low voice, "Leila, a wise woman finds strength in obedience. God blesses those who accept his plans without question." When I was 21, my parents arranged for me to marry Reza Nazari, a civil engineer from a respectable family with an impeccable reputation. Reza was 28, with a serious face framed by a well-groomed beard and eyes that conveyed the certainty of someone who never doubted the truths he had inherited. Our wedding was a traditional party in my family's garden, with over 200 guests dancing until dawn, lit by torches that shone among the rose bushes my grandfather had planted decades ago. Our first years together were marked by quiet happiness. Reza was an attentive husband who brought flowers from the market every Friday and never raised his voice. We lived in a simple apartment in the Chaharb neighborhood, where the windows overlooked a small garden that I tended with roses and jasmine. In the evenings, after prayers, we would sit on the terrace drinking tea, dreaming about the future together. Reza wanted to build bridges, and I wanted to fill the house with the sound of our children's laughter. When I found out I was pregnant in 2018, I felt like I had finally found my purpose. During those 9 months, I would stroke my belly while reciting verses from the Quran, certain that I was preparing my child for a life protected by Allah's blessings. However, the birth of Darius brought something new inside me, something I still didn't know how to name. When I held my baby for the first time, looking into those curious eyes so full of innocence, a disturbing question arose in my heart. Is this all there is? Is life all about obeying without question, simply following what has always been imposed on me? It was then that Mariam Karimi entered my life, like a cool breeze amidst the suffocating summer heat of Isfahan. She was new to our neighborhood, a 35-year-old woman with a smile that seemed to hide secrets, and a serene look in her eyes that I couldn't quite understand. Her husband had gotten a job at the oil refinery, and they had just moved into the house across the street. From the first moment, I sensed something different about her, something that caught my attention in a way I hadn't expected. While the neighbors looked at Mariam with the distrust we usually have towards outsiders, I felt drawn to her presence. There was a softness in the way she spoke to me, a calmness that clashed with the harsh manner of so many women around me. Our first meeting took place at the market. While we were picking out vegetables for dinner, she asked me with genuine interest, "Leila, how are you?" And for the first time in years, someone seemed to actually want to hear an honest answer. At first, our conversations were light, about simple things. Recipes, prices, the mischief of children on the street. But little by little, they began to take on a different tone. Mariam had a view of life that made me question the certainties I had carried for so long, even if it was only inside. "Well kept. Do you ever feel empty, Leila?" she asked me one September afternoon, as the scent of saffron wafted from the kitchen. The question hit me like a revelation. I had felt this emptiness growing ever since Darius was born, but I had never had the courage to admit it. Not even to myself. It was during one of these nights, during more intimate conversations, that Mariam began to talk about Jesus. At first, her words sounded strange, even dangerous. In Iran, Talking about Jesus beyond his role as a prophet is a big risk, but the way she described this man called Jesus was unlike anything I had ever heard. He did not come to be served, but to serve. She spoke with a tenderness that dismantled my defenses. Jesus valued women, respected them, treated them all as equals. The week that followed became a secret journey for me. Mariam lent me a small New Testament in Farsi, hidden inside a cookbook, like a treasure waiting to be discovered. At night, after Reza was asleep, I would curl up under the covers and read in secret, illuminated by the dim light of my phone, like a teenager reading forbidden love letters. Jesus' words fell upon me like cool water to a parched soul. "Come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." I had never read anything that touched my heart so deeply. The change within me was slow but irreversible. I began to see my life, my marriage, and the faith that had been passed on to me as something new, different from what I had known. The automatic prayers of Islam, which I had previously repeated without thinking, began to sound empty. Jesus' words, on the other hand, echoed a truth that my soul recognized, even without fully understanding. One November night, as I cradled Darius in my arms, gazing at his angelic face illuminated by the moonlight, I whispered a prayer that would change everything. "Jesus, if you are truly who Mariam says you are, if you love me as she claims, then I give you my heart." In that intimate silence, in the sanctuary of my room, I felt something I can only call a divine touch, a deep peace that washed over me, the knowledge that I had found something I had unknowingly been searching for my entire life. But along with this peace came a dark premonition. This new love had a price I could not yet measure. Being a Christian in Iran does not mean just changing your religion. It means becoming a fugitive in your own land. From that moment on, my life was divided between two parallel realities. On one side, the devout Muslim woman that the world saw. On the other, the secret follower of Jesus, growing in the darkness of my heart. The first changes were small, almost imperceptible. My prayers stopped being simple mechanical recitations and became sincere conversations with a God that I felt close, real and present. When Reza heard me mumbling during my prayers, he thought I was more dedicated than ever, not realizing that my whispers were not to Allah, but to Jesus. The irony was cruel. My greatest act of rebellion was seen as the height of obedience. Mariam became my secret companion on this journey of faith, my only connection to a Christian community that existed invisibly, always protected from threat. She told me about small groups that met in homes, always moving from place to place, always on guard against discovery. "The church in Iran is like the roots of a tree," she said one afternoon as we drank tea in my kitchen. "You can't see it out there, but it grows strong and deep down there, nurturing a hidden but vibrant life." But leading this double life began to take its toll on my soul. Every time I joined in family prayers, feeling the Arabic words tumble out of my mouth without meaning, a knot tightened in my chest. I felt like I was betraying my new faith. Every time I prostrated myself toward Mecca, my heart actually turned toward the invisible Christ who now lived within me. The contradiction between what I showed the world and what I felt inside became increasingly heavy. Reza began to notice small changes in me that he couldn't quite understand. My smile became more genuine, my patience in the face of difficulties increased, and something new, a profound calm, took over the way I faced each day. "You're different, Leila," he said to me one night over dinner. "More relaxed. It's like you found something that was missing." His words stirred two opposing feelings in me, fear and hope. Fear because I was afraid he would discover my secret. Hope because I knew that Christ was truly transforming my life from the inside out. The most distressing moments were during Islamic religious celebrations. During Ramadan, I fasted to keep up appearances, but secretly my soul fed on the word of God that I had already memorized. During the Muharram processions, when everyone beat their chests in memory of Hussein, my heart wept, but not for the reason everyone imagined. I wept because I had to live a lie, because I could not declare the name of Jesus out loud. Darius, my little boy, became both my greatest strength and my greatest struggle. Every night as I rocked him to sleep, I fought the urge to tell him the stories of Jesus instead of the traditional Persian legends Reza expected me to repeat. I wanted my son to know the truth that had changed my life, but I knew that even a small child could inadvertently reveal everything and destroy our family. Motherhood, once my purest source of joy, became a battleground between my love for Darius and my loyalty to Christ. Nights became my sacred refuge, After making sure Reza was asleep, I would hide in the bathroom with my phone, reading the Bible verses Mariam sent me in coded messages. Entire passages became lodged in my memory. I became a walking library of God's word. But each dawn reminded me that the treasure in my heart needed to be kept under lock and key. Its discovery could destroy everything I knew. The year 2021 arrived with a tense atmosphere in the air. Reza began to observe me with a cold and penetrating gaze, like a predator facing its prey. His questions grew sharper, more dangerous. "Why have you been smiling so much lately?" He'd ask me over breakfast. "What do you talk to Mariam about so much?" His eyes would narrow whenever he thought I wasn't looking, and I could feel the weight of his suspicion building, like a storm about to explode on the horizon. The first real crack in my mask came one night during dinner at my in-laws' house. The conversation had drifted to the plight of Armenian Christians in Iran. Without thinking, my voice rose, fervently defending their right to practice their faith. "We all serve the same loving God," I said, unable to contain the passion that welled up in my chest. The silence that followed was crushing. Reza's eyes fixed on mine with a piercing intensity, as if I had crossed an invisible but fatal line. His father, a rigid, traditionalist man in his 70s, grumbled, "Only a heart infected by foreign ideas would speak like that." That night, Reza confronted me for the first time. There was no shouting or violence, but there was an ice in his voice that I had never heard before. "What's wrong with you, Leila? You sound like those missionaries who tried to deceive our people." His words cut deep. He was getting too close to the truth. I lay awake all night, listening to his breathing in the next room, wondering if he was pretending to be asleep just to watch me. The next few days became a dangerous game of hide and seek. Reza watched me with silent but relentless attention. He began coming home at unexpected times, appearing out of nowhere when I was talking on the phone or reading a book. He would sift through my conversations with subtle excuses, always with a smile that never reached his eyes. "I just want to make sure you're okay, my love," he would say, but I could feel the net closing in around me. Mariam and I had to be even more careful. We developed a discreet system to communicate without arousing suspicion. When I needed to talk urgently, I would hang a white towel on the porch. If she placed a pot of geraniums in the window, it meant it was safe to visit. Our exchanges became quick whispers between tasks, stolen words of encouragement as we picked up bread from the local bakery. Tensions reached a boiling point when Reza began questioning my reading habits. He noticed I was spending more time on my phone, and his questions about what I was reading became more and more insistent. "You've been reading a lot lately," I said one day, pretending not to care as I picked up my phone. "What's so interesting that it's holding your attention?" My heart sank. I was reading a Christian devotional Mariam had sent me. Even though I deleted the message, I knew Reza was smart enough to try to retrieve whatever it was if he got suspicious. One night in March, the confrontation I had been dreading finally happened. Reza had spent the day feeling strange, disappearing into his office with my phone for long minutes. When he returned to the living room, his face was filled with a rage I had never seen before. In his hands, the proof of my betrayal shone, the Christian devotional book he had somehow retrieved from the phone's memory. "What is it, Leila?" Reza's voice was low, almost a deadly whisper, filled with a silent threat that hurt more than any scream. The words caught in my throat, freezing the air around us. For months, I had imagined this moment, practiced answers, excuses, lies that might save what was left of our lives. But now, staring into that furious gaze, my mind simply slipped. "Can you explain to me why my wife, the mother of my child, is reading this stuff, this Christian propaganda?" The question hung in the air, heavy as a sentence. In that moment, looking into the eyes of that man I loved so much, I understood that my old life was over forever. There were no words that could mend what had been broken. No explanation could bridge the gap that had opened between us. The half-truths, the secrets, all of that was over. My secret was out in the open, and now I would face the price of choosing Christ, a price far greater than I could have imagined. Reza decided that I needed to be cured of what he saw as a disease of the mind. For 3 days after my faith was revealed, I was confined to our home while he consulted with his family and sought guidance from the imam of the mosque. I heard cold whispers through the walls that chilled my soul. They spoke of me as if I were a woman possessed, someone lost, who needed to be restored to the true path of Islam. I heard his mother say firmly over the phone, "You have saved many women from these dangerous Western ideas." The Islamic mental health clinic was located far from the center of Isfahan, hidden behind high walls and manicured gardens, a perfect disguise for the horrors that unfolded within. Officially, it was a place that combined modern medicine with traditional Islamic values. In reality, it was a prison for minds that dared to think differently. The morning they took me there, Darius cried in my arms with a sadness that seemed to foretell what was to come. "Mommy will be back soon," I whispered to him, for the first time ever telling a lie to my own son. Reza avoided looking at me as he gathered my few things. "It's for your own good, Leila," he murmured, almost trying to convince himself. "Dr. Mohammadi will help you remember who you really are." His words sounded hollow, rehearsed, filled with quiet guilt. Dr. Mohammadi was a man in his 50s with a neat gray beard and cold, razor-like eyes that seemed to scan every thought I tried to hide. His office was decorated with verses from the Quran, written in perfect Arabic calligraphy, and pictures of him standing next to respected clerics, reinforcing his ruthless authority. "Mrs. Nazari," he said, his voice soft and more menacing than any shout, "I know you're going through a spiritual turmoil. We're here to help you find your way back to the truth." His smile didn't reach his cold, unforgiving eyes, which seemed to bore into my soul. The admissions process had been meticulously planned to strip me of any semblance of dignity. They confiscated all my belongings, my clothes, my small comfort items, and dressed me in a gray uniform, making me look more like a prisoner than a patient. I was reduced to a number, 47. According to them, names were a luxury for the sane, and I clearly was not. They took me to a tiny, cold, sterile room that would be my home for the next 2 weeks. 4 white walls, a narrow bed, a desk bolted to the floor, and a barred window that looked out onto a courtyard where the sun never penetrated. The day began at 5 in the morning, marked by the call to prayer. But these were not the comforting prayers of my childhood. They were intense brainwashing sessions designed to crush any resistance. For 6 hours a day, we were forced to repeat specific verses from the Quran that denounced apostasy and extolled the supremacy of Islam. La ilaha illa Allah, Muhammad Rasul Allah. The words were chanted until they lost all meaning, becoming a monotonous drone that filled the empty minds around me. Dr. Mohammadi personally conducted these spiritual realignment sessions. In groups, we were forced to confess our impure thoughts and denounce any foreign influences in our lives. I sat in the circle, surrounded by glassy-eyed women, some of whom had been there for months, all of whom rejected anything other than Orthodox Islam. During my 3rd session, he addressed me in a firm voice. "Sister 47, it is time to recognize the satanic nature of your Christian thoughts. Repeat after me. Jesus is not the Son of God, but merely a prophet subordinate to Muhammad." The silence that followed was heavy. The other women watched me with a mixture of pity and fear, while I felt those words stick in my throat like a poison that I refused to swallow. My resistance became apparent, and the methods intensified. Then came the individual sessions, which he called spiritual shocks. Hours of listening to recordings of the Quran at deafening volume, strobe lights flashing over my closed eyes. "His mind has been infected by Christian demons," Dr. Mohammadi said. "We as coaches must exorcise these influences through total immersion in the word of Allah." The nights were my only respite, but even then the torment continued, in more subtle forms. My roommate Soraya had been there for 8 months, for daring to question why women couldn't testify in court with the same weight as men. She whispered to me in the darkness, her voice choked with months of psychological torture. At first I resisted, but now I just want to go home to my children. I don't even remember why I thought it was worth fighting for. During the food purification sessions, we were forced to fast for days, only to be fed meals that they said had purifying spiritual properties, a cruel form of control that mixed faith and suffering. Malnutrition and exhaustion, combined with the relentless psychological pressure, created a state of extreme vulnerability in me. "A weak body is more receptive to spiritual truth," Dr. Mohammadi proclaimed, surveying our increasingly skeletal forms with a calculating eye. But in the darkest moments of that nightmare, when I felt my sanity slipping through my fingers under the crushing weight of brainwashing, Jesus' words echoed in my heart, like a beacon in a storm. "Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." These words were so deeply engraved in my soul that not even Dr. Mohammadi's most brutal methods could completely erase them. At the end of the 2 weeks, when it became clear that my spirit would not be broken without even more extreme methods, which could cost me my life, he made a decision that would forever change the course of my existence. "Mrs. Nazari," he announced with clinical coldness, "although we have not achieved complete conversion, we consider that you have received sufficient treatment to be released. However, I must inform your husband that your mental state remains unstable." Her words sounded like a death sentence to my marriage and motherhood, spoken with the casualness of someone discussing the weather. Returning home after 2 weeks at the clinic was like waking up in a world that no longer belonged to me. The house that had once been my refuge had become hostile territory. Every familiar object seemed to silently accuse me of betrayal. Reza greeted me at the door with a confused expression that mixed relief, resentment, and something I had never seen in his eyes before: fear. Fear of the woman I had become. Fear of the decisions that could destroy our family. Fear of a future I no longer controlled. Darius ran to me with his arms outstretched, crying, "Mother!" a pure joy that pierced my heart like a blessed dagger. For 2 weeks I dreamed of this moment, imagining the weight of his small body against mine, the sweet smell of his hair. But when I finally held him in my arms, I noticed the immediate changes. He was thinner, his eyes had a nervous gleam that I didn't recognize, and he clung to me with a desperation that betrayed the fear of separation. "Dr. Mohammadi has informed me of your condition," Reza said that evening, as we ate dinner in a heavy silence, like a tombstone hanging over our heads. "He says that although you show signs of improvement, your mind is still tainted by dangerous ideas." Each word was a blade, chosen to wound with surgical precision. "I cannot allow these thoughts to contaminate our son." The next few days were an ordeal of pent-up tension. Reza set up a system of constant surveillance, turning every moment of my routine into a forced performance. I could no longer be alone with Darius, not even for a moment. There was always someone around: Reza, his mother, or a relative who came to help. My phone calls were monitored, my outings were restricted to an absolute minimum, and any conversations with neighbors were monitored, superficial and brief. Mariam simply disappeared. Her house was empty, the windows boarded up, and her garden was beginning to wither, neglected. When I tried to ask her neighbors about her whereabouts, I heard hesitant answers and saw uncomfortable looks, the silent confirmation that her family had been removed for safety reasons. And so my last bridge to the Christian community evaporated like smoke, leaving me completely alone in my faith. The final confrontation came one afternoon in April, when I found Reza in my room, packing my belongings. The divorce papers were spread out on the bed, just waiting for my signature. "You gave me no choice, Leila," he said, his eyes never leaving his work. "I can't stay married to an apostate. It's a risk to my reputation, to my job, to Darius's future." His voice was automatic, as if he were reciting a text he'd learned to shield himself from the pain he felt. "What about Darius?" I asked, even though I knew what the answer would be. My voice sounded strangely distant, as if it were coming from someone I didn't recognize. It was only then that Reza really looked at me, and for a fleeting moment, the man I loved shone through that rigid mask of faith and judgment. "Darius, stay with me." Those words hung heavy in the air, like a sword ready to fall, and for weeks I had felt that weight. A mother who renounced her faith had no right to raise a Muslim child. It was the law. At that moment, my world came crashing down, as if an earthquake had destroyed every foundation. I had broken down during interrogations, survived brainwashing, endured endless humiliation, all the while hoping to return home to my son. But I finally understood the true cruelty of it all. It wasn't enough that they tried to take away my faith. They wanted to take away from me what I loved most, the reason to keep fighting. "You can't do this," I whispered, feeling my legs go weak. "He's my son. I carried him. I nursed him. I gave him my all. I had loved him every day of his life, and my words sounded desperate even to myself, but I knew I was pleading with a man who had already made up his mind, bound by a law that does not recognize a mother's love as a valid argument. Reza looked away as he stated the terms of my exile. "You have until tomorrow morning to leave. You can take your clothes and a few belongings, nothing else. The divorce papers for apostasy are already in the religious court. Your custody of Darius has been revoked. Permanently." His voice wavered just a little on the last sentence, but the damage was done. His decision had destroyed me as much as it had destroyed me, even if the rigidity of his faith had built insurmountable walls between his father's love and his religious doctrine. That last night, in the house that had been my home and the scene of my broken dreams. I lay awake beside Darius's crib, etching every feature of his face into my memory. His long, dark eyelashes, the delicate way his hand curled into his blanket, the quiet rhythm of his breathing, my lullaby for 2 years. I knew that in the future, these images would be my only sustenance, when all I had left were memories to feed my motherly love. My prince, I whispered into the silence. Mommy will always love you, no matter how far I have to go. One day when you are grown, you will understand that I did not abandon you of my own free will. The tears I had been holding back for weeks finally escaped, wetting the pillow as I tried to fix in my mind the weight of her sleeping body beside me for the last time. The morning arrived with the typical cruelty of fate. Riza had arranged for his mother to arrive early and take Darius, sparing us the conscious goodbye I had been dreading. When I woke up, my son was already at his grandparents' house, and I didn't even get a chance to give him one last hug. The house, now empty, echoed the silence of his absence. Each toy scattered on the floor seemed like a silent accusation. My sister Farah came to help with the bags, her eyes red from the tears she had shed since learning of my situation. "How could you do this, Leila?" she asked, folding my clothes with shaking hands. "Was it worth destroying your son's life for this new faith?" His question hit me like a spear, because I had asked myself that question thousands of times during sleepless nights. "I didn't choose this, Farah," I replied, carefully tucking away the few photos of Darius that Reza had allowed me to have. "I didn't choose to be born in a place where loving Jesus is a crime. I didn't choose for my faith to be discovered. I didn't choose for my son to be taken away from me." My voice grew firmer with each word, fueled by months of pent-up anguish. The only thing I chose was not to deny Christ, even under torture. The taxi that would take me away from the world I knew was already waiting, silent and somber like a hearse. As I carried my bags, I felt the eyes of my neighbors through the windows, some curious, others with that silent compassion that is only reserved for those who know that someone's life is doomed. I knew my story would soon become a whispered lesson among the women in the neighborhood. This is how you punish a woman who forgets her place. As the taxi pulled away and the house grew smaller in the window, I clung to the words of Jesus, my anchor in the darkest moments. "He who loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me." But understanding this truth in your head and experiencing the pain of loss in your chest are things that no words can explain. My heart felt like it had been left behind in the house I could no longer call home. The journey from Isfahan to the Turkish border was a slow, painful descent into ever-deepening layers of despair. With every kilometer away from my son, it felt like a nail was being driven straight into my chest. I traveled on crowded buses, where dust and silence dominated the atmosphere. I was surrounded by strangers who did not know my story, but who somehow avoided my gaze, as if my pain were something too contagious to approach. My documents already bore the mark that identified me as a person of religious interest, an invisible but heavy label that would follow me like a shadow until I managed to escape Iran for good. In Tabriz, the last major city before the border, I spent 3 days in a cheap, damp, claustrophobic room, waiting for the right moment to try to cross. The smell of the room carried stories of other refugees who had passed through before me, shattered dreams that seemed embedded in the walls. Through the window, I watched the mountains rise, immense and silent, like a barrier between the past I was leaving behind and the uncertain future that awaited me. During those nights of waiting, I prayed with an intensity I had never experienced before, not to recover the life I had lost, but to find the strength to rebuild a future with the pieces that were still left. The crossing to Turkey would be made possible thanks to a clandestine network of smugglers who helped religious refugees escape. The man organizing my escape was named Ahmad. He was a CDO, and his own family had suffered at the hands of the regime. "Sister," he said as he reviewed my forged documents for the last time, "the path you are taking is dangerous, but staying here would be worse. At least in Turkey you will be able to breathe free." His words carried the raw experience of someone who had helped hundreds of people escape the impossible. We crossed the border on foot, on a dark, moonless night, following trails that seemed known only to goats and smugglers. The cold mountain air burned my lungs as I followed the guide's silhouette ahead of me, trusting my life to a man whose face I could barely make out in the darkness. Each step took me further away from Darius, but it also brought me closer to a future where I could live my faith without fear of arrest or institutionalization. Istanbul welcomed me with its urban chaos, a city that never sleeps. The sounds, smells, and frenetic energy of millions of people going about their lives invaded me after weeks of enforced silence. I settled in the Fatih neighborhood, where many Iranian refugees were beginning to set up their first temporary homes, trying to rebuild pieces of what they had lost. The Exile community was easy to spot. There was that same shadow of loss in our eyes, a nervous way of looking over our shoulders, and a quiet longing for news from home. The first few months in Istanbul were a constant battle to keep my body and mind sane. I worked cleaning offices at night, a tiring job that allowed me to be invisible during the day, when Turkish authorities were ruthlessly searching for undocumented refugees. The work was exhausting, but it gave me a sense of purpose, something I needed to keep going. And most importantly, with what I earned, I rented a small room where I could finally pray in freedom, something I hadn't done in years. The Christian church in Istanbul became my spiritual and emotional refuge. St. Mary's Church in the Beyoğlu neighborhood opened its doors every Sunday to a diverse congregation: Turks, Arabs, Iranians, Afghans, all refugees who had found a steady point in Christ amid the chaos of exile. The church leader, a man named Mehmet, was wise and had a look in his eyes that seemed to understand my pain without me having to say a word. "Sister Leila," he told me after my first week of worship, "I see in your eyes the sadness of a mother separated from her child, but also the strength of a woman who chose the truth, even knowing the cost." His words were like a balm. For the first time since my escape, someone acknowledged my pain and my courage without trying to diminish either. At church, I met other women with similar stories. Nasrin, who had lost her 3 children in Afghanistan for converting to Christianity. Amal, who had been rejected by her Syrian husband because of her new faith. Fatima, who had fled Saudi Arabia after her own family tried to kill her for apostasy. Our paths had different details, but the essence was the same. We all chose Christ, no matter what. On Sundays after church, we would gather at Mehmet's house to share traditional foods from our countries and pray together for the families we left behind. These meetings became our healing sessions, where we could cry without fear, mourn our losses without hearing empty answers. "Pain is the price of love," Nasrin would say, and we kept paying it because we still loved. Every night before I went to sleep in my small room overlooking a narrow alley, I prayed for Darius. I didn't ask him to come back. I knew that was impossible as long as Iran remained under those laws. Instead, I prayed for his protection, for his health, for his happiness. I prayed that one day, when he was old enough to understand, he would be able to forgive his mother for choosing Jesus over the safety of being together. News from Iran trickled in through social media and secret contacts. Sometimes I would get snippets about Darius from a cousin who still spoke to me discreetly. I heard that he was growing up healthy, that he was beginning to form complete sentences, and that he would sometimes ask about me, his mother, who had passed away. This news was both a blessing and a torment. It fueled my love for Darius, but it also heightened the pain of all I had missed from his childhood. Yet it was in Istanbul that I finally found the peace I had been seeking since my conversion. There, I no longer had to live a divided life. I was able to pray without fear, open the Bible without hiding, and worship freely. The religious freedom that I had taken for granted when I was young and naive proved to be the most precious treasure anyone could have. Waking up every morning without the fear of being arrested for my faith was a divine gift that I treasured with a gratitude that made me cry inside. 3 years have passed since that journey through the cold mountains to Turkey. And although my heart bears the deep scar of separation from Darius, I have learned that spiritual freedom can walk hand in hand with the most intense pain. In Istanbul, I built a new life, not the one I dreamed of in my youth, but a life that, for the first time in my 30s, is truly mine. Today, my work has changed. I teach Farsi to other Iranian refugees and help translate documents for organizations that support asylum seekers. More than just surviving, I have found a purpose: to be part of a network that helps people rebuild their lives after losing everything because of their faith. Every story I hear, every paper I translate, every tear I wipe from another refugee reminds me that my suffering was not in vain. If it can ease one person's pain, it was worth it. The church has become much more than a place of worship. It is my chosen family, my healing refuge. Mehmet invited me to share my testimony with newcomers every week, and I've come to realize that telling my story doesn't reopen wounds. Instead, it turns my pain into strength for others. Your pain becomes a balm for others' pain, Nasrin told me after one such conversation. This is redemption. Every year, on Darius's birthday, I host a small celebration in my apartment. I invite the other exiled mothers from our congregation, and together we pray for our children who are far away. We light candles, exchange stories about our little ones, and cry over the hugs we never gave, the whispers of goodnight that got stuck in our throats. These encounters are painful, but also healing. They remind us that a mother's love transcends all boundaries, that it can survive even the cruelest separation. My faith has deepened in ways I never could have imagined when I was that Christian hiding in Isfahan. I have discovered that suffering does not destroy true faith, it purifies it, just as fire refines gold. The words of Jesus that I had been reading in secret for so long now echo freely in my daily life. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. These words have proven truer than I could have ever imagined. On days when missing Darius weighs too heavily, when the pain seems almost unbearable, I find myself questioning whether I made the right choice. Was it worth following Christ, if it meant losing my son? In those moments of doubt, I return to his words about the cost of discipleship and realize that he never promised it would be easy. His promise was that despite the difficulty, it would all be worth it. Every day lived in spiritual freedom here in Istanbul confirms that silent truth. My deepest hope is that one day, when Darius is an adult and free to make his own decisions, he will seek me out. I pray that when that day comes, I can be a mother to him that he can be proud of, a woman who has chosen truth over ease, integrity over safety, that he will understand that I have not abandoned him because I have not loved him, but because my love for him includes a desire to show him by my example that there are principles worth sacrificing everything for. Until that day comes, I live every moment as an act of worship. I wake up every morning free to pray. Every Sunday I worship without fear. Every honest conversation about my faith is a small victory against the system that tried to destroy my spirit. I've learned that persecution can take everything you have, but it will never touch who you are deep down in your soul. To my brothers and sisters who hear this story from the comfort of places where religious freedom is guaranteed, I ask that you never take this for granted. Pray for those of us who have paid too high a price for following Christ. Support organizations that help religious refugees. And most importantly, remember, right now, in countries like Iran, Afghanistan, Saudi Arabia, and so many others, there are mothers like me facing the cruelest choice anyone can make, deciding between their faith and their children. My story doesn't end here. Every day I write a new chapter of faithfulness to Christ on the bustling streets of Istanbul. And even with the scar of separation from Darius, forever marked on my heart, I also carry with me the indelible mark of God's grace, the one that sustained me in the darkest nights and guided me until the dawn of a new life, free in His presence.